So to all of our panelists, of course, welcome. It's a real pleasure to be leading a conversation with all of you very distinguished people. It's almost intimidating, I must say, but I feel very lucky to be able to do this. I think that the session today is titled Past, Present, and Future. I think that we'll probably lean a little bit more into the future side of things. But of course, not ignoring the past of journalism and also the present, which I think it's fair to say is a crisis. I think a crisis that has been going on and building for many years. 15 years into a journalism career in South Asia, I've never had a job that is not precarious or never known an industry that is not in perpetual crisis and change. So I think before we go into maybe the present and the future, Santwana, I wanted to ask, maybe to start by asking you to reflect a little bit also on the past. And I mean, I think that in the context of the present crisis, there's a tendency to maybe romanticize the past a little bit more than we should. I don't know if that's an accurate portrayal. I wanted to ask you, with your deep experience in Indian journalism especially, how the past looks to you from the current vantage point.
I think in journalism, we are in general very cynical people. Okay, we are a bunch of cynical people. So there, whether it was past, present, or future, we always look at things through a prism of critical prism. And the past, I don't think there was any romanticism about the past, because we had close encounters with authoritarianism in the past, during emergency, and in and around that as well. I remember, very prominent editors being put behind bars during that period because they had written things which was not liked by the Indira Gandhi regime at that point. So it is not something that, it was never, as they say, a romantic idea. And I have done my journalism in a paper which had to face the brunt of taking on the establishment, so to say. Okay, so we have faced that from reporters to journalists, and I can tell you that when you write against or too critically, all regimes come down on you. And they have various ways to threaten you, various ways to ensure that you don't get to write or say what they don't like. Okay, so that was always there. What has perhaps changed now is there is a kind of unset lines on the sand which has been drawn. There is no emergency that against draconian law against which you consolidate and you fight. Okay. It is something which is very, very tangible, but it is actually governed by intangible, nuanced messaging here and there. You get my point? Some of our legendary journalists have been forced to get into alternative media, opening up a new platform, not like Dhania as such. Dhania is a young person who came and has done extremely well, but they were very seasoned journalists for whom the platform of journalism, mainstream journalism, shrunk and became unavailable. So they had to go and actually explore alternative media to make their voices heard. Okay, that is what has changed.
No, thank you for that. And taking advantage of the depth of experience that we have here with Sashi and with Panneer as well, I want to open the same question to the two of you. In light of all of your deep experience in journalism, Sashi, in your case, more specific to India, Panneer, you've of course had a much wider regional lens on everything as well. How does the present moment look to you?
I think we are really at an inflection point in journalism. I don't think it's business as usual. Yes, emergency was certainly a big aberration, I think. But looking back, we have moved from the state threat to the media to a double whammy of the state and the corporate threat to the media in tandem. So that, I think, is fairly unprecedented. I remember when I was in college, there was emergency, and before that, in my post-graduation years, you know, we used to raise slogans against Ramnath Goenkaji, now that she's here, saying he's Jude Baron and so on. And then I felt foolish after the emergency, because the only man who stood up to the emergency, really speaking, not the only one, I would say, in a substantial sense, was the same Ramnath Goenka. So you find that there were corporate barons who would oppose the state. You don't see that now. They've all capitulated. And the gutsy journalism that's taking place is, as was mentioned, the alternative, the digital media, represented by a number of people, including young, feisty Dhanya Rajendran, who I'm proud to say is an alumni of the Asian College of Journalism. So that is one big shift. And I don't think also it's as invisible, the lines that are drawn. The government is trying its damnedest best to restrict the media. They have proposed laws against digital media. Courts have stayed them, you know, at the highest level, or at least at the High Court level. And I don't think we've seen the end of that either. But this is not peculiar to India either, you know. And the other thing that's happened is there's a kind of consensuality in the mainstream media to go along with this. And I say this not just about the Indian press. You'll see that look at what's happening in Gaza. You know, they are killing children and women day after day after day. And it's become almost, I hate to use the term, a new normal as far as the mainstream media is concerned. New York Times, Guardian, Washington Post, you know, they have very subtly made this confluence between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. If you oppose Zionism as an acute kind of virus, that's seen as anti-Semitism. And you know what's been going on. We have a similar situation here. If you say anything which is anti-BJP, it's seen as anti-Hindu, confluence of Hindutva and Hinduism. And we heard, I think it was Madhav or one of the BJP leaders say the other day that there's no difference between the two. And if there's no difference between the two, we are damned as a nation. So, and all this, the media doesn't question. The media multiplies, the media propagates. So it's, in my view, a very different situation in the 4 decades of journalism that I've seen. I don't think we've had it so bad. And I don't know how the future will proceed. It needs the guts of journalists, you know. And there's no working journalists. Journalists as a category are also intimidated within the organizations. It's not as if they get the space to really write or speak or you know, show what they like, depending on whether it's television or radio or podcasts or print. So I think there's been a qualitative shift, and it comes at an inflection point when the credibility of journalism has taken a beating because of the huge influence of social media as well. We know about what's happening in Gaza because people who are dying are telling us their stories using mobile video. We know about what's happening in troubled spots and war zones because of journalists who are local people who are telling us their stories. And therefore, the mainstream media is going through a process of check and balance in the social media. And so I think social media is not all evil. In my view, social media has played a huge role in keeping mainstream media at least alert to an extent. But on the other hand, the relevance, the credibility of journalism has certainly taken a beating. And therefore, I heard somewhere in something saying that journalism is dead. I would say that journalism is dead, but shall we say right royally, journalism is dead, but long live journalism. I think there's got to be a new journalism which comes.
Absolutely. Thank you. Panneer, if I can also ask you to weigh in.
See, I think we are conflating two issues. There's a crisis in news industry and there is a crisis in journalism. If we conflate these two things, we get into tricky problems. For instance, ideas like revenue model has very little to do with journalism. The real problem with journalism is that one component called bearing witness has taken a severe beating. Our reporting is now being substituted with opinion writing. The alternative platforms which have emerged have all emerged as opinion platforms. Very little reportage. Look at three major developments. One is demonetization, abrogation of Article 370 and NRC and CAA. What were the level of ground level reportage? There were any number of opinion pieces, which means what we are witnessing today is that we are having opinions with little bearing witness component. The crisis in journalism today is that there's a shrinking space for bearing witness. Therefore, the reportage is not getting its due space, and reportage is also cost money. People have to travel, they have to spend time, and then they have to file the story. It's very easy to produce an opinion piece. But this conflation between opinion and reportage is a key issue, and partly we also try to conflate the crisis faced by the news industry with the crisis in journalism. Yes, news industry is facing a major crisis, but we can't conflate that crisis with the crisis in journalism.
Understood. Thank you so much. And I wanted to pass it on to Vignesh, because I mean, as Panneer has rightly pointed out, there's a crisis in the business of the industry as well. And as the both of you pointed out, it's the independent outlets that are doing the gutsier journalism. News Minute, of course, a shining example of that. But the struggles of keeping it funded and finding within this crisis of the news industry models that can sustain expensive but absolutely essential things like reportage, that falls to you, Vignesh.
Yeah, so I'm not a journalist, first of all, so I just run the News Minute, so I'll speak from that perspective. But just like what Panneerselvan said, that there is a genuine crisis in actually how independent media can be funded. So see, when we started, we were a traditional model of sorts, so we relied on advertising, so we would go and plug as many copies as we could, try to drive the traffic up so that we could go and sell for branding. It was only late until 2019 we realized that that's a very flawed model, especially for an independent publication, right? You don't have a marketing team, you can't go and sell ads, you don't have the bandwidth or the resources to do something like that. Luckily for the News Minute, we got in touch with Abhinandan, who's running News Laundry successfully, and it's a completely reader-driven model as such, right? So from 2020, News Minute also moved towards a more reader-funded model. I genuinely believe that the future of journalism, at least for operations like us, the smaller ones, will significantly only be run by people at the end of the day. And that's something that I've always believed, that, instead of when brands come and give you money, then you write for brands. If political parties come and put their ads on your website, then you're writing for those political parties, because it's a paycheck at the end of the day, right? So if they're significantly funding your organization, and if they pull out those funds, you're going to be in dire straits again. Having said that, to raise money in a country like ours, I mean, with all the restrictions that the state has been imposing on digital platforms just like us, when we started out, we could raise money from abroad anywhere in the world, and there was absolutely no stoppage or anything like that. But right now we have significant rules in place where we cannot raise money from abroad. Even taking subscriptions from abroad is looked at very closely and stuff like that. At the end of the day, we've been able to survive because of our readers, our people. Our audience is not as big as what legacy media has, but we don't need that kind of an audience to sustain an operation like this, because if a handful of people, I mean, India is a large country at the end of the day, I mean, even if 20,000 people or 30,000 people start funding independent publications, they will survive. And not just survive, they will actually thrive. But something along from the past to the future. Yesterday, I was sitting in a session where Professor Mohan Gopal was speaking, and he was talking about the 75 years of the Supreme Court. And he said that the biggest mistake that the judiciary in India is facing is we've never been able to build an inclusive or a diverse judiciary at the end of the day. And I feel that, considering I'm only representing a digital platform, whatever happened in the past happened in the past. But I think significantly all organizations, news organizations have faced the same problem. We've never built diverse or, inclusive organizations. I think the present, and especially with independent organizations, I think that thing is changing. I think we're looking at a future. I'm very optimistic about the future in terms of journalism. I think the future in journalism holds for those people who've been harmed in the past, who've been excluded in the past, or who've been failed in the past. I think these are the people who are going to bring out journalism in the future, at least in a country like ours.
Peter, I also want to ask you to weigh in, I think, of course, with a very different perspective. I think that you coming in as somebody working for an international newswire, I think that I know you've served in many different parts of the world, looking at many different parts of the world, coming in and seeing Indian journalism within the currents of global change with AI and everything else that's coming at journalism today. How do you see what's happening?
I mean, yes, I speaking from an international global perspective, coming from a little bit of a different background from that, and perhaps just to explain, so I work for the French press agency, Agence France Presse, so we don't have a platform ourselves, but we would sell what we write, or our photos, or our video to clients around the world, both in India and elsewhere. I think the challenges that India faces are those which, to some extent, every country faces. Political challenges, economic challenges, but certainly what I've learned and what I've seen and what remains core to what we do, and I think, at the heart of every journalist, past and in the future, is that sense of bearing witness. And for us, the motto in the office is always, boots on the ground. It's if something happens, if an event is breaking, the most important thing that we can do for ourselves and for the clients who are relying on us is to make sure we send people to bear witness, whether that's a train crash, a political rally, a disaster, a conflict, to see that for ourselves and to ensure that reportage is given is validated through the eyes of correspondents, reporters, photographers, videographers who are there and can witness it for themselves. So that would involve, of course, so we had one of the largest teams in Gaza. Our office in Gaza was blown up by a tank shell. Colleagues of mine were blown up on the Lebanese-Israeli border, teams in Syria, here in India and elsewhere around the world. And the challenge of journalism, yes, there's the challenge of funding, which is always huge, the challenge of AI, of the challenge of the shifts through social media that has really turned the world of traditional mainstream journalism sort of on its end in the last 20 years or so. But I think, I suppose, a slight segue, but what I wanted to point out was, so I work for an agency that is one of the oldest in the world, and I think it began by sending carrier pigeons in sort of 1835. And today it's a constant stream of information filed over internet. But when I began, it was going to a phone booth and reporting my copy over putting the pennies or the equivalent of rupees in the phone booth and dialing in the copy over the telephone. Whereas today, I can open up a laptop, I have Wi-Fi, satellite links, or whatever it is, to be able to file that story in seconds from the point of which it is happening, or as close as practically we can get there. And when we look at the future of journalism, I think there's two issues there, one of which is what could it be and what should it be? And the should is bearing witness as much as we possibly can. The could is, up to all those challenges as to whether what actually takes place does take place.
If I can push you a little bit further just on what you were saying about boots on the ground, I think that, there is the question of what's happening now with AI. I mean, of course, that is a question for the future of journalism, but I think right now we're all more or less in the dark in terms of what it will really be capable of and then what it will mean. But just in terms of the role of the journalist as somebody, as somebody on the ground, do you see AI as hurting or helping in any way?
I mean, going back to your point as a journalist, as a cynic, I think it's very easy to see everything as a negative force. I mean, AI has hugely aided the journalist's role in terms of, for example, transcription of an interview that can be done in real time. So, a press conference can be going on and there is the transcript in alternative languages in real time. That's a staggering tool. And through the ability to send and file stories, to the connectivity between people, for when an event, for example, an earthquake, for the ability, as a journalist, I might be hundreds of kilometers, thousands of kilometers away from the event, but almost immediately on social media, I'll be able to see what we call UGC, user-generated content of videos of the said earthquake. But I think with that comes the huge challenge and massive responsibility of not knowing if that content that we see online is real, is AI created, is false, deliberate disinformation or misinformation, just fake news. And that ends up, in a strange way, reinforcing the traditional role of the journalist more than ever, which is, in the end, the only way one can verify it 100% is being the eyes and ears on the ground and going to see it ourselves. So in that sense, that old mission of getting out, getting your notebook out, what we call shoe leather journalism, because you're actually using the shoes, shoes to walk in the dust and meet people and talk to people, is something that's more important. It's always been important, but more important than ever, not to rely on what we see online, but to actually have that verification for ourselves.
Absolutely. Sashi, you, of course, very closely involved with the Asian College of Journalism. Panneer, I know that both with ACJ and elsewhere, as a trainer, mentor in many capacities, both of you have been looking very closely at what comes next in terms of the skills that we need to impart to journalists who are coming into the industry today. I wanted to ask, Sashi, maybe starting with you and then passing on to Panneer, about what you have been doing in response to all of the challenges and changes that, that the panel has laid out, in terms of arming the next generation with the skills and the approach that they need.
I think what we need to do is get them to de-learn, some of our cardinal values and core principles of journalism are important, but the way it was defined, for instance, bearing witness. Who is bearing witness? As an embedded journalist in Iraq? Who is bearing witness in Gaza? I mean, I'm glad that AFP has people, boots on the ground is easy, but what we got to hear from Iraq was Western journalists standing on top of their, their five-star hotels, because you can see the top of the palm tree behind them. They're never on the boots on the ground, just boot on the terrace. Because they can't get out. They'll get, they should be careful, of course, if they can't. So you depend on local resources, you'll depend on local stringers, compile all of that and communicate. So bearing witness is important. And since, he linked it to artificial intelligence, I think that's one area where unless you've seen something, I don't know whether an artificial intelligence agent can, a device can substitute that. So that's the best part of journalism that's least replicable, shall we say, or dispensable in terms of artificial intelligence. And yet the perspective matters, boots on the ground. I mean, I don't want to be provocative, but for instance, we must now tell our students, as we do, look at what is the provenance of your news? Who is purveying the news? Which part of the world is purveying news to which part of the world? What standpoint? There are three big news agencies, say AP, AFP, and Reuters. Among the three of them, they control 85% of what news is disseminated in the world. And there was a Swiss media research analysis. I'm sure you looked at that as well. And AFP has some 3,000 journalists all over the world. AP has 5,000. Reuters Thomson has about 3,000. So this is overwhelming, domineering news agency. I mean, and they're doing a lot of good. But when push comes to shove, it's a perspective that gets developed, propagated. It's a viewpoint that gets propagated. So I think what young journalists, what we try to do is tell them, question the basics, Look at who is giving the news, who is saying what to whom, why, with what effect, and for, this whole idea of communication. I think that's very important. And the other thing is, of course, technology, to make them AI savvy. We've just gone through a 4-week, 5-week intensive program on AI at the ACJ, getting international experts there residently and coming to our college and delivering how to approximately, say, look at aspects of fake news, of how do you enable deep learning. How do you, for instance, I think the catchword now is get into augmented journalism through AI. And it has a lot of benefits. It makes your journalism richer, it makes it more savvy, it makes it quicker, as he said. A lot of mechanistic, routine stuff can be left to the AI. That should give you more time to perspectivize, to think, I also think it's not a bad thing to have more opinion, or as much opinion as news. Because you need to give perspective to because news is now available. Even I think digital channels are feeling challenged because social media is putting news out there. Good, bad, indifferent, that's true. Fake news, disinformation, misinformation, but it's there. So you're competing with an environment of formal media, informal media, social media, and news is coming to you by the minute, by the second. But what you need is to get the context, to get the perspective, to get a view on this. And therefore that I think is an essential part going forward of journalism. So I think young journalists should be equipped with that. Because the moment you accept a news at face value, you're already on the wrong track. You need to, I think, so that's the filter process I think that we need to endow them with.
Can I please have an intervention?
Please.
Shashi, I think it is very, very unfair for you to say that in Gaza, embedded journalism is happening. There are 100 journalists who have died in this year. Half of them have died in Gaza while reporting. It is so very unfair to put out this kind of message. I very strongly object to this. And as recently 5 of them have been killed. 5 of them have been killed. To run down because of course embedded journalism happened in Iraq. Yeah, and but that is what you are hinting at. You are saying, of course, there is an inhumanization of the entire population has happened. Okay, I am here staying with a former, in the same this thing with a former Supreme Court judge and a very senior lawyer. Both of them said, oh, they don't read newspapers. Why do they not read newspapers? They are watching social media. They get news from social media. What do you get from social media? What do you get from social media? There are journalists, of the 100 journalists, 50, there is insensitive. The readers have also become insensitive. Readers have also become insensitive. When children die, I have carried photographs of Gaza. I did not see the kind of response that I would have seen when I started journalism. When I started journalism, Sashi had not made his foray into television. I have seen Sashi come out respecting
Santwana?
the way what journalism he did and I have seen his TV channel taken over by corporate. I have seen the entire process, and from the day I have joined journalism, I have heard this thing being said, oh, journalism is dead. Journalism is dead as long as you believe it is dead. As long as you believe it is dead. I know that I have written on stories in Karnataka, from Karnataka election. The ruling party senior minister called that I am responsible for their defeat in Karnataka. How is that possible? That big juggernaut of a party and me with my sort of very niche circulation, how do I manage to defeat a party? No, I wrote from the ground the truth. I headlined it with honesty. There is still space. Don't believe this propaganda. Don't believe. If you don't have the guts to write, that is different. If your space has been co-opted by the corporate, it is different. It is different. But don't say, don't propagate this. Of course, there are multiple layers of layers. There is corporatization of media. There is lack of readership. There is lack of disinterested readership. Not just people are not reading. People are moving towards audio. People are moving towards audio. They are not reading. Okay? That is a problem. And then you have social media plus AI. Of course. Of course those problems are there. Of course they are there.
Understood. Thank you. And Sashi, yes, I think to put the record...
First of all, I did not talk about embedded journalism in the context of Gaza. Everyone has heard me. I spoke about it in the context of Iraq.
Agreed.
Gaza, I said, there are people dying there. Journalists, of course, have died there. There are people dying there. There are citizen journalists dying there. Lives are being lost for covering the war, for being in the war of no choice, not of their choice. Secondly, I did not say journalism is dead. I was picking up something which was which came here. And I said journalism is dead and followed it by saying long live journalism. If you have not listened to me fully, please don't blow back with such fervor. So, but I certainly believe the rest of what I said, that the mainstream media has by and large capitulated. It is the alternate media that is giving you journalism worth the while. And I hope the mainstream media will emulate the example of that.
Absolutely. And I think that we can all, I think, on this stage agree, and if anybody disagrees, please let it be known that what is happening in Gaza is absolutely atrocious. The targeting of journalists, deliberate. 5 journalists sleeping in a van. I did not hear you say anything about embedded journalism in Gaza, and I think that we can all agree in condemning that wholeheartedly. Paneer, if I can pass on to you, I think also as in your role as a journalism educator, mentor, and of course, I think somebody that a lot of people in the industry lean on for perspective and I think also wisdom, I should say. What are you thinking in terms of the changes that need to happen in how journalism is taught as we approach this future?
See, the biggest issue today is less of state intervention, but most of self-censorship which is at work. The way this self-censorship is working is actually worrying. And that is pervading. And the self-censorship is also where one person starts that becomes a model and everybody tends to follow that model. What we are witnessing today is a proliferation of media rather than plurality of media. If you understand today what we are having is genuinely proliferation and not plurality, we'll understand the crisis what we face. For instance, when Bhopal gas tragedy happened in 1984, there were at least 8 or 9 reports which captured different aspects of the gas tragedy. Today, we have about 500 channels covering the same issue, but each having the same perspective. Therefore, what we are witnessing today is self-censorship, and self-censorship is the biggest issue, and there journalists have contributed towards undermining of our rights. Partly state played a role, partly market played a role, but we also played a big role in undermining our own rights. Unless and otherwise we start asking our questions. See, at the Asian College of Journalism, we had a young journalist who suddenly got up and said, I don't understand this idea of less attention span of our generation. Our generation are reading J.K. Rowling, which is this size. And you generation who read Enid Blyton this size have the temerity to turn around and say that our generation is suffering from attention span. Therefore, that is a very, very important observation by a young participant. And she says that, how do you look at ideas like binge watching? Is binge watching possible if we suffer from attention span? These are the questions which actually helps us to pose questions about the type of stereotypes we try to understand the crisis media is facing. To overcome these things, we have to look beyond the stereotypes to look at the challenges in front of us.
Understood. Vignesh, if I can ask you as well, as somebody running an organization, over recent years, have you seen a change in the kinds of skill sets and perspectives that that candidates for openings in your newsroom are bringing to the table? And are you seeing any particular skill sets and perspectives that you think we need much more of?
So I'll just take the AI question as well before I answer this this one. So we're a very small platform. We have only about 40 people. So we've had a lot of discussions on this AI thing and how it can enable journalism and stuff like that. We've never thought that AI will take away jobs from the journalism profession as of now. Maybe later down the line, I don't know. But we're very reader driven, right? So even when Paneer was talking about ground reporting, see, we've sent a team of 3 people to Manipur to cover what's happening in Manipur. We are an organization which only focuses on covering South India, but a lot of our readers and our subscribers wrote into us and said that, why are you not reporting about what's happening in Manipur? As a population which is from the South, we'd also like to know. Now that was completely reader funded and we sent people there, right? So we have never thought about, oh, will AI replace this or will AI replace this? We are only looking at serving the people and the people who read us. Yes, I do agree with her that readership is dwindling. But I don't agree with the fact that, okay, fine, we should not look at newer formats. We have started podcasts because we feel that there is an audience who wants to listen to certain kind of podcasts. We are okay with anybody engaging with journalism the way they want it to be. And we're okay opening up ourselves to say that we will adopt to that. Now, coming to the skill set of such, yes, it's very difficult to hire at this stage because a lot of people who even graduate from colleges like ACJ and stuff like that, who are very well equipped to enter the journalism profession, they always look at PR organizations or something, and there's an inherent fear that, oh, if I send my kid to become a journalist or send them to a newspaper or a digital organization or whatever it is, what happens to them? And obviously the people who are consuming news and the people who are trolling us on Twitter are not doing anybody a great job. They call us prostitutes and whatever words and stuff like that. So all those things are in the back of their heads. But one thing that we always ask people is, how much do they read? It's very important because if some people come and tell us that, oh, we get our news from InShots or social media, then that's a red flag straight away there. We're not going to hire those kind of people. I mean, we've seen, at least in the News Minute, a lot of people who've done a law degree seem to be very good fits for the journalism profession. Maybe they don't want to continue doing law for whatever reason it is. But we've had a lot of success with interns who have passed out of law colleges, more than journalism colleges. A specific skill set, I think, is something that you can groom. And as a smaller organization, you have access to everybody from the editor-in-chief to the junior most reporter, so you get to learn a lot of things. But I think you need to come with a lot of fire. You need to have some kind of compassion towards a job which is, I think, very, very honorable. I think for the first couple of years of your career, all the younger people here should just join journalistic operations just to understand what passion that people are working there with. Please understand that I know that money is not as high as the corporate jobs, but I think for the first few years of your career, you should be in smaller organizations like this to actually understand what people are genuinely doing and the purpose of the fact that, yes, we are fighting for our country. I love this country. I want to fight for it. Just because we write against a party, that doesn't make us anti-national. Please remember that. We are not anti-national people. I think we are more nationalistic than anybody else at this point in time.
Thanks, Vignesh. Peter, I want to kind of zoom out of India again and kind of ask you the same thing. I mean, in terms of the currents that you're seeing in international journalism and the way that the job of well, the wire services, the international and foreign journalists who are looking at various parts of the world, are you seeing a change in what's being asked of them, both by the industry and also by the final consumer?
Yes, is the short answer. I mean, I think the demands are changing, but they have always been changing throughout time. I think that there is a general shrinkage of, here I am, British, white, sitting in India, but that traditional sense of a foreign journalist coming from outside and deciding to report about the country, that is shifting, and and largely rightly so. People are writing about their own country for a foreign audience, and there's no reason why that shouldn't be the case. But there is a general shrinkage of what it was 20 years ago of a foreigner coming to a country to write about a country for a foreign audience. And the pressure on the wire services, so, by far the vast majority of our team here in India and in South Asia are from the countries, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, where they are coming from, citizens of those countries. The demands on those people are increasing because there is a perhaps lack of the funding cuts around the world. So there are less people here reporting on it, and so therefore the reliance on the wires, the traditional services, is growing, and that's great for us. But it means there is increasing demands, increasing challenges to make sure that we report the facts and we report it correctly and accurately and fairly, and without as best as our ability, without the bias or without the platform or without the opinion piece edge that a newspaper is important to tell for. But for the wires, what we try to do, I mean, we don't always get it right, but at least the heart is there, is to tell it impartially as it is happening. But yeah, the demands are growing, year by year. From what I've seen over my period, working as a journalist for AFP for the last 20 odd years, increasingly so.
Understood. We are tight on time, and I want to make sure that we leave enough time for questions from the audience. So I think at this point, I'm going to open it up to all of you. I think we have about 12 minutes by my timekeeping. So please. Maybe we can do 2 questions at a time, and then we'll just open it up to the panel for anybody to answer either of them.
Sir, it's a great pleasure to be in this discussion. The first 2-3 points I have to get it cleared. First thing is that I've learned that Indian media...
Sir, if you can just keep the mic closer.
Firstly, some great men in India long back said about Indian media. Indian media is owned by Baniyas and manned by Brahmins. And nowadays, this media, of course there are few exceptions, are all, what can I tell you, the national medias, are majority of them are almost equal to the values of toilet papers. To be frank with you, it's almost toilet. Of course, there are exceptions. Journalism has nowadays become journalism. In Malayalam, we call it journalism. Journalism is decades. So all these anti-national groups in India, that is at the top with the cross-thread, bearing cross-thread people, the Brahmins and Baniyas, they control the newsrooms of this whole country. And they manufacture lies, and they're blocking the truth, the reality of Indian people, masses. That is why all the non-issues are made issues and issues are made non-issues. So this brutality, actual terrorism in India is the terrorism of the media. What I tell you, the Brahmin Paniya terrorism, they are doing actually in the media level. And now the higher judiciary is also joined them. So this is the country of the tragedy of this great nation. People with such a great population, only a microscope minority, just within 10% of Indian population. This cross-thread people, basically their culture is anti-human, anti-social, and anti-national. These people are controlling everything. Those who control the minds of the people control everything. This is universalizing. So this pathetic situation is to be changed. I don't know how, without the entry of this different nationalities of India into this newsroom, I don't think there is any change possible. So, of course, there are exceptions which gives you hope definitely is there. Individual exceptions are there. And only exception, I think that few exceptions are in Kerala. And another most dangerous thing in India is all the news agencies in India are fully manned by Brahmins and other such prosperous people. They are manufacturing lies, utter lies against the reality. So these things have to be changed. I don't know how all this can be done unless the younger generation come to understand. Only just a few, at least a small fraction of truth is coming through the social media. And even in that media, these people, these anti-social groups are having terrible hold, because money is in their power, muscle is in their power, and media is in their power.
Please.
Hello. I will agree with my friend. It was always Banias and Brahmins. Nothing new about that, like any corporate sector. My only point is that in 1971, Indira Gandhi got brute majority, 68% of seats in Lok Sabha. 1984, Rajiv Gandhi got 80% of Lok Sabha seats, brute majority. And that time, Indira Gandhi up to 75, to use some legal means to control the media, 75 to 77, that's a broad point. But during Rajiv Gandhi's time also, media was very strong. They used to question. But now with the Modi, not even a single party having majority, only 240. Total this thing. The brute majority is not there. Why the media has become so weakened? Why corporates is taking up? Why resistance is not coming? And not using that rules also. They are only scaring. Why this sort of happening for the media, corporates, what or me? Ordinary people remaining the same. Sometimes support this thing. No time they got more than 50% majority. Rajiv Gandhi got a maximum 49% of votes only. Why media degenerate to this level? Why they lost the backbone? What is the reason? And emergency only said that when we are asked to bend, they used to crawl. But all through they are crawling only. And what is the why it can bring back?
Thank you for your question. I think just to take a second question from here, and then I think I'll open it up to the panel.
Hello. My question is very different from the context they've said. I'll just introduce that I am 22 years old. I'm very new to consumption of news. My mode of consumption is way different from many people in the audience. I read mostly digital platform of news, most News Minute and News Laundry, Scroll, all of these are very important ones. But when Sir Panneerselvan sir mentioned about objectivity and the conflation with opinion based, this got me thinking, because my always a fear in my head has always been, am I entering an echo chamber when I'm reading alternative platforms? Because there are very strong themes in these alternative platforms which probably validate my own bias. So I am always questioning my own bias. And when you have a reader-based model, any alternative media has a reader-based model, and these problems of opinion-based news, emerging more strongly. How can you, prevent creating an echo chamber? How can you prevent creating readers or news consumers who are, just trying to have their validation bias?
Understood.
Well, I agree with you to the last question first, that the younger generation, from our own experience, they consume news on mobile, on smartphone. And so it's a digital mode of consumption, and they naturally, it's not a newspaper reading habit. Unlike me, I miss something if I don't read a newspaper in the morning. So it's a different experience. But having said that, I don't think they are lesser informed. They are informed in terms of the areas that they want to be informed. The whole prescriptive idea of that you need to be knowing all of these, and all of you know all of these. That's when you get more and more of the same in journalism, right? If an editor in an organization says we've missed a story, what I assume she or he means is that another channel or another newspaper did not have a story that it had a story that you missed. It's not an objective because there are 100,000 millions of things happening in the world. So what is the message for the journalist? That you should not miss a story. If you're not to miss a story, you need to do the story which somebody else is doing. And this is how the agenda setting function of journalism actually comes into play. I mean, so you'll find the same. Why newspapers, I can understand, they're put to bed, and look at television channels. They'll have the same set of news, in the same order sometimes, and the discussion will be on the same one or two things, with the same guests and same specialists flitting from channel to channel, and yet they'll all be saying live. I don't see how they can be live if they're flitting into. So this has become a ritualized mode of news delivery and consumption, which is where I think the hope of silver lining is the digital media, because they are directly, I think, looking at the millennial generation. They're looking at those who are interested in looking at news in a plural form. So although, as you said, the kind of stereotype might be, setting in there as well. All digital media might begin to look alike. I don't think it is, but that's what your concern was. And whether there's an echo chamber or a filter bubble that's operating there. Yes, certainly, because if it's a constituency, see, after all, let's not fool ourselves. All journalism in India, I mean, English language journalism, is for the middle class. How much of rural India is there in our news? Because you're not reaching out to different demographics or different class or caste sections of the media. How much of Dalit news do you get? You get it only when there's an atrocity, You're not talking about the life of, you're not talking about the process of living of Dalits or of the disadvantaged or the deprived in this country. Because all that is not interested. Because at the end point, the owner's point of view is, I need to reach people who have the purchasing power to buy the goods that are advertised in my newspaper. The rest of them are not his constituency or her constituency. So these are natural limitations. And I think, Karl Marx and Engels called it bourgeois press because that is the nature of the press. So I don't think there's a problem there. And I wouldn't say, this whole Brahmin conspiracy theory I don't subscribe to. It is true that because of a whole centuries of dominance, there's some privilege, but I don't think, I wouldn't attribute it to a caste, but there is certainly a caste that is left out, both in terms of the practice of journalism and perhaps consumption of that journalism, which is the Dalit. Which is why in ACJ we have conscious choice of making, Dalit, journalists. They are totally left out of the picture. How many Dalits are there in journalism? And even if they enter, how many of them can stay on in journalism? Because there is continuous, insidious oppression of Dalithood in the workroom, in the newsrooms, in the mainstream media generally, not just newspapers, in channels and so on. So these are things that are happening, and unless you change that, you will not get a more inclusive, more plural, more representative media in the country.
Sashi, I seem to be getting into your this thing, crosshairs all the time. I must point this out. It is like I protested when Gaza, the journalists who have died in Gaza, is not mentioned. I have to tell people who are sort of looking at journalism through the prism of caste that Jagaran is one of the biggest Hindi print line that we have. During the COVID, it is Jagaran which carried the stories about bodies of COVID victims, COVID deaths floating in Ganga, in the Ganges. On the banks of Ganges, bodies getting burnt. It is Jagaran which did it. A mainstream as you can get. A large circulating Hindi daily. And what happened? They were raided. They were raided. So, dear readers, when you also become victims or get sort of a different kind of WhatsApp university tutoring about the media, please remember all this. There was a magazine called Outlook. It is still there, but in different form. It did a cover story called Missing, meaning the government missing during COVID figures. We still don't have the exact COVID death figures. Called Missing. The entire top editorial the editor, the managing editor, everybody lost their jobs after that. Okay? And that magazine has now gone away from current news to something else altogether. They only carry aces now. Okay? One of our legendary editors, Vinod Mehta, had conceived and, made that, magazine. So this is what has happened. And when you say, and with broad brush, say, it is only an atat of two upper caste combination, it is really a little unfair. It is really a little unfair. And I would say, add to that, I'm very proud to have been a colleague of Manoj Mitta, one of our sort of very promising, brilliant Dalit journalists. Okay. Manoj has done brilliant work on 1984 riots. He has done brilliant work otherwise. His Supreme Court reporting was, I consider it one of the best that has ever happened. I am proudly say that he was my colleague. And he made me understand a few things. And I realized as a woman, I have more things that can be common with what his thinking is. And how we look at traditional literature, news. So it is not really unfair. And I can very proudly say, Sashi, in my paper, there are 3 women who are writing edits today. Gulnar Mirza, Sitara Paul, and Bala Chauhan, and Ranjita Gunashekaran. All of them brilliant writers. And they don't, I have problem. Okay, they write no holds bar edit. Gulnar's edit on after the, by the way, we broke the story about hijab controversy. Okay, because we have the largest network of reporters on the ground. And Gulnar, I think, wrote the best edit, best piece on that controversy. So there are things happening. Like it is unfair to fall into the trap of Hindutva or other religious denomination, WhatsApp, university tutoring. It is also not fair to fall into trap of brushing the media in the same brush. Where do you get your news? Sometimes ask yourself. Where do you get your news?
We are out of time, unfortunately. I know that there are more questions. I will invite all of you to please come at the side of the stage, ask your questions. I'm sure that our panelists would be happy to spare some more time, but we are compelled to clear the stage for the next session. Thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you to all of you for being such a good audience. And thank you once more to WLF.